Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Detections with your hosts, Understudy 77, and
Exile the Trades. So I
we
think I
hope
think we want to start off with a simple statement.
we do, and I think that that's fair to say, and I think we should both say it, right? And then we'll talk about it a little bit. But that statement is very simply Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
It has been probably one of the most crazy weeks in recent memory for American history, and equal rights and the fight for equal rights has been going on, and that has been. I mean, it's a very divisive topic, and that's something that we're aware of, but it's also not something that we're going to shy away from discussing, right?
Yeah. And on that, I saw a statistic that backs that up. So, how often do we see all 50 states in the United States agree on something?
And are you discussing the fact that there's protests in all 50 states right now?
All 50 states, yeah, and it's 18 countries in Europe. I saw that this is now the biggest civil rights protest that has happened in world history.
Jeez. And I mean, it's necessary right now, right? Like, we're in a situation where, no matter your feelings on the topic overall, and the reason why we say Black Lives Matter, and the reason why that's important is not because we're not suggesting that all lives matter, but we are talking about the systematic disenfranchisement of an entire race of people in the United States right now. And it's important to call out that their lives matter. And it's important for them to stand up, and us and everybody to stand up with them and demand that justice happens. Like, we're in the middle of these protests for police brutality, and all we're seeing every day is additional brutality. And that's,
Yeah, and I see it 15 miles away from where I live pretty much nightly since they started.
I mean, we're about 30, like, because, I'm not that far from DC, and I've got people getting pepper sprayed and shot rubber bullets at so the president can go take a photo op, which is phenomenal.
So that reminds me of something that I saw. People who were not very religious normally can't stand it. And it was something along the lines of "Hell hath frozen over the day that I agreed with Pat Roberts."
Just if you're not paying attention to what's going on out there, you need to. Like, this is history in the making, and this is so very important. And one of my hopes is that this doesn't kind of go soft or die out like any of the protests that have come before it, where people get complacent, after things stop. And there's a really, really good video by Trevor Noah of The Daily Show, and we should probably we'll link it. It's 18 minutes, and it kind of explains his feelings on what led up to this, what it really accounts to, and really what this stuff looks like. And it was a really good thing to watch. And after watching some of the protest videos and some of the things that are happening to people, like, I'm not a naturally emotional person. Anybody who knows me will know that. I have been having a very emotional and very difficult week with everything that's going on. And my thoughts are out to just everybody who's going through this. And I don't have a lot of really good words for it. And it's not like any condolences I could make would really be worth a damn. But my heart is with everybody who's out in the streets right now, because I think they're standing up for something that truly needs to be stood up for, and systematic change has to happen. And my heart is breaking a little bit more every day. I'm going to get choked up if I keep going, so I'm going to hand it to you now, because I don't want that on a recording.
What I want to add to that is what I see my neighbors hurting. I see my neighbors that have been hurting for a very too long of a time, and it needs to stop. And each one of us can find people around us that are hurting and have gone through this, that we can just say, "How can I support you?" and look them in the face.
And that's the question that we should all be asking right now. How can we support you? What is it that we can do best? Like, it is time to listen. Like, it is really time, at least for white guys like me in exile, to listen, right?
Yeah. I mean, and as an example, I'm not just saying this. I was at the Portland protest last night. I mean, everyone who listens here knows both Sean and I like to talk a lot. I have no problem sucking the air out of the room. All I did last night was I carried water in a backpack, had a first aid kit with me, walked around, talked to people, and asked them if they needed water and if there was any way I could help them. And I also took some pictures.
I saw that, but I mean, it's, yeah. So as we come into this, we actually have a couple pieces of interesting news that we think line up pretty well with detections and the going-ons of the world. And we're going to kind of carve out the beginning segment here to talk about that stuff a little bit. We're going to pivot away from the protest for a second, and we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about some things going on in social media with Mr. Donald Trump and the Twitter war that has started, which is just ridiculous. And then we'll pivot from there to some other things about it. So
and we do have some like technology focused things that also relate to the current events with Black Lives Matter and the law enforcement of it too.
Absolutely. So as we go through this, it gets really interesting. So I think it's probably safe to say that everybody knows that Donald Trump and Twitter have had kind of a love-love relationship for a very long time, right? That this is the first president I think we've ever had who has been that freely open to do whatever he wants on social media himself, like on his own social media, and post a lot. Well, things are starting to change a little bit and honestly, as we get closer to the election, we'll probably do a whole episode about disinformation and how disinformation is used. And I think that would be a really cool guest episode to do as well. And I have a few people in mind for that. But disinformation is such a huge thing in tech companies, and huge tech companies are really starting to get concerned with election safety and making sure that good information is coming out and fact checking and kind of being custodians of the data that they have to a certain extent, right? Because in some sense, you know, when you look at some of the numbers and you look at hundreds of thousands of fake accounts that are stoking the flames on either side, and then you look at reports that there are foreign actors that are making these accounts that are stoking the flames on either sides, like it becomes really beneficial for some of these companies to start using the data that they have and start to call out disinformation. So Twitter made some kind of changes. So their safety rules to include content that could place people at higher risk of COVID-19. So basically, they're requiring people to remove tweets that include denial of expert guidance, encouragement to use fake or ineffective treatments, misleading content, things of that nature. One moment.
So just while we got the moment here, a thought that came to mind is with the misinformation and this stuff, this is an area where those of us who have the knowledge, expertise, passion, interest in learning all the various intelligence gathering techniques like open source intelligence and things like that, that one could use that skill set to help better the community around them by even doing that in their free time and calling that stuff out.
Oh, 100%. And as you see disinformation on these platforms, I genuinely encourage people to report it. And I actually expect, and this is something we should look into to see if there's any groups that you can get involved in that help with this stuff. So a post was made about hydrochloroquine and erythromycin taken together to change the history of medicine by Trump. Somebody did that, and I think they died. Like it didn't work. So anyway, we fast forward a little bit, and a post gets made by Mr. Trump saying there's no way, and I'm going to just read this. 0, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, and even illegally printed out and fraudulently signed. The governor of California is sending ballots to millions of people. Anyone could, whatever. Twitter took a huge step.
Okay, before you do that, I just want to say the state that I live in, the state of Oregon, has been doing mail-in ballots since I've been able to vote.
Yes, mail-in ballots are very common. And this is why I say Twitter took a huge step. They put a little warning right underneath that tweet that said, get the facts about mail-in ballots. And you can click on that little warning, and it takes you to some pages with some different news articles and some other tweets and a whole bunch of different information about mail-in ballots. saying, hey, like, this probably isn't true. So, needless to say, our commander in chief lost his damn mind. Twitter is now interfering with the 2020 presidential election. They are saying his statement is false and will lead to corruption and fraud, incorrect based on fact checking by fake news, which is something that we've heard from this man a lot. Twitter is completely stifling free speech, and as president, I will not allow it to happen. So what did he do? He said,
I heard an ad hominem and at least a red herring in there.
of course. But what did he do? He signed an executive order in an attempt to kind of intimidate Twitter. He really can't do anything with the executive order, but he's got to play to his base to a certain extent. But either way, he signed this executive order on Section 230. What Section 230 is, and this is where it gets really, really kind of fucking funny. Section 230 says it protects tech companies and like companies like Twitter to keep them from being held responsible for the individual writings of their users. So basically, you remove Section 230 and Trump does something stupid, or anybody says something stupid and it leads to harm of someone else. They could hold the company liable for that post. So like what he's trying to repeal would actually mean that they would have to police his tweets way, way more intensely than what they are right now. But you know, you're talking Smoke and Mirrors Act, right? You're talking show of strength, blah, 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 all the makings of the authoritarian government stuff. So he goes down this, and then the protests come into play. And a tweet goes out that says, we're going to assume control. We're going to dominate the streets. And I quote, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Not necessarily something I ever thought in my lifetime I would hear from the president of the United States. I'm not going to lie.
I'd say any Democratic leader
Correct.
in the world.
Correct. It's very authoritarian kind of thing. Anyway, so in response, what happened was Twitter said, hey, we're not even going to fact check you. We're going to hide it. They plastered a warning label over the tweet that says this tweet violated Twitter's rules about glorifying violence. However, because it's a political figure, Twitter has determined that it may be in the public's interest for the tweet to remain accessible. Basically saying, we think that people might want to see this, but we're going to give you a warning that this breaks our rules and we're not going to show it unless you click a button.
And it also sounds like if it hadn't been the president of the United States, it just would have been flat out removed and the account would have been banned.
Probably. So, on top of it, the White House tweeted the same thing, quoting Mr. Trump. The White House account tweeted this too. Not just Trump. The White House said when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And the White House equally got violated and tweet blocked. So there's been some comments that I've heard where Trump's talking about, oh, like, yeah, we got it. Like the government's just going to make a better Twitter. Blah, 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 a whole bunch. So it's this huge, huge, big mess going on. And I encourage people to actually read the article. We will share it because it continues from there into, Facebook. So we've got the Twitter side of it, right? So now we're going into Facebook.
Now, real quick on the Twitter side, as evidence about the whole banning, a number of people have stood up mock Twitter accounts where all it would do was tweet out word for word Trump tweets. And some were blocked in 12 hours, some were blocked in 68 hours, but every single one of them has been blocked in less than a week.
Oh, God, yeah. So, there's even some Silicon Valley back and forth here because Mr. Zuckerberg from over at Facebook does not feel that Twitter is in the right. I'm going to be honest. I applaud Twitter. I think everybody's tweets should be fucking fact checked. If they can figure out a good way to automate fact checking, they should. And there's a really, really fun article that I had read that one of the, and legitimacy unsure because, it's a anonymous report from Twitter, right? But one of the individuals who who works at Twitter apparently reported, like, somebody asked in a conference call, like, hey, why don't we treat white nationalism as hate speech? And why don't we ban it? And the answer that they got back was apparently, because that would take out too many Republican, like, politicians' accounts. And, like, full disclosure, like, I am not a Democrat or a Republican. Like, I am pretty much a dead moderate who believes in social liberties and standing up for what's right, but I'm also somewhat fiscally conservative. So before anybody just goes, oh, you Democratic whatever, you liberal what, like, I'm really not. Like, I'm a dead moderate. But I did find it hilarious that somebody from Twitter said, we can't ban white nationalism because Republican politicians would probably get caught up in the filter. And we're not interested in that.
Yeah, whatever you think of the politics, that's just funny right there.
Right? It's hilarious. So I personally applaud Twitter because, you know, as InfoSec people and as people who have kind of a bit of an understanding about what's going on with disinformation in our country in the last election, I think the fact checking is phenomenal. I think it could very easily be used for evil or to support individual companies' agendas. And I think that must be considered. But I also genuinely applaud this concept. Mark Zuckerberg, however, thinks that this is blatant, like, just not something that you should do. Like, as a, you know, platform company, you should never, ever do this. He disagrees with it. So a bunch of people from Facebook had a virtual walkout last week. They took the day off work. Managers have. I mean, you're talking director to VP level. People were like, nope, I'm protesting. I'm not part of this.
Yeah, and I don't know the total count on that, but it wasn't like single digits. It was like triple digits.
No, I think it was a couple hundreds.
Yeah.
A couple hundred. A lot of people disagree with this. Now, I'm sure there's people who don't care, who agree, but it did happen, and it is interesting news. And so, like, we're going to tie that into one more, and then we'll kind of talk about, we'll kind of wrap this up, right? Snapchat, or Snap now, is also no longer promoting Trump's account. So, you know, Snap used to consider him a promoted account, and they're no longer doing that after the shooting starts comment. So this gets really interesting for a couple of reasons, and I knew that this one was going to take us a while to get through because it's really interesting. It's almost historic in its own right, right? We have never seen our political, or we have never seen our tech companies and our platform, like social media companies, necessarily even try to take this kind of a stand or not. It's going to be really interesting where this ends up, because there's a really fine balance between maintaining people's trusts within these social media companies and making sure that they have access to accurate information, especially when today the majority of people seem to be getting their news from Facebook and Twitter and things of that nature. And I mean, people can say whatever the hell they want, and they do all the time. Like, the level of misinformation across social media platforms is at an all-time high. It's crazy how bad it is, right? So, like, I think we're at a really historic time where some of these companies are saying, you know, we have a social responsibility to do something about this, and we should do something about this. And they're trying, and they're being met with crazy friction from the federal government, because why wouldn't they? We have a president who lies all the time, and he doesn't want to get called out on it because that doesn't make him look good. He doesn't control the narrative anymore like that.
And another thing to consider about how historic of a moment in time in world history we are right now, the fact that these companies are taking the time to consider how they're going to do this is a huge statement in and of itself.
Correct. I mean, we're essentially saying, like, we're at that point where we're saying, you know what, free speech exists, but, like, as a company, we're no longer going to support your hate speech. We're no longer going to support you inciting violence. We're no longer going to allow this to happen. You can fall on either side of how you agree with about whether or not you agree with that or not. I myself have torn feelings on people's ability to scream whatever they want to in the ether versus a company has the right to have values and protect its platform from hatred.
It reminds me of something I saw where it was a clip of someone that used a racial slur, and then right after they just got punched in the face, and it was freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences.
Yep. I used to have a teacher in high school who used to say, he used to walk around the room when he was talking about this, and he'd just swing his fist back and forth. And he'd say, I have every right to do this. He goes, until, and then he'd like just tap somebody in the face real lightly. He'd be like, until my fist connects with your face. Then my right ends. But I end up being very torn on this because I was very against, like, I'm very against a lot of these companies also kind of attacking like sex workers and stuff too, who are using platforms for publicity and fans and followings and stuff. But again, like if I say that they get the choice, then they get the choice, right? So this is a really sensitive and probably will be a very historic topic. And it's something that I feel strongly that people should pay attention to, and we will update you as we hear more about it.
Well, and then this is where we actually get to see our mixed market economy work, right? All businesses always have had the freedom to choose to limit their base on whatever, right? It's a privatized product that isn't using any sort of like taxpayer federal funding to do. So they have the freedom to choose to limit how they want, but they haven't up to this point. And if they start doing it and they like say sex workers, people, the general populace wants to support their ability to do that, and they stop using that service, they're just not going to get the money and will either have to make a different business decision or go out of business.
Oh, yeah. Or all the hacking videos will go to Pornhub like they have.
And OnlyFans for conferences.
Right? So, like, you know, it's going to be a really interesting time because it's going to be interesting what line people settle on. Because I am 100% for attacking disinformation, calling out disinformation, and fact checking, because that saves people like me who like to do that and like post it and be like, yo, like you should check your fucking source.
And we do that to each other too.
We do, but it saves us a lot of time instead of doing it like for other people or against each other, right? Like, oh, the platform did it for us. That's cool. But at the same time, like we have to be careful of this line. But it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years. Not even the next couple of years. This year with the election cycle is going to be really interesting where social media falls in. I really, really strongly believe that it's going to be interesting. And social media is going to probably dominate the results of the election anyway. So like pay attention to it. Right? It did. Absolutely. So like pay attention to this stuff because it is important. And it's, you know, there are probably going to be, if there aren't already, a whole bunch of people who step up for election security and things like that. And that's not just voting machine security, but that's disinformation. Like disinformation and tracking disinformation in and of itself is becoming its own full-time InfoSec intelligence job. Like it's a huge thing now. It's something that I have quite a bit of interest in. It's something that like my wife is super duper interested in. And a lot of people that I know are very interested in it as well. We saw it with Corona. We saw it with the last election. I think this is going to be the worst one. This one's going to be bad.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And on that, I mean, related to what you're talking about with Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, most people access that through their phone. And
yeah, so that pivots us in to the protests, and let's talk about that stuff a little bit.
Oh God! So I'm going to just briefly mention the article that we have here related to this, and then go off in the protests. So Gizmodo released the article about how mobile phones are gold mines of hidden data for cops. And as we talk about the protest, I highly recommend, because there's a lot of information here that a lot of people may not be aware of. Go read this. Do the research, fact check it yourself. But yeah, protests, especially with applications like Instagram and Facebook. And I say Instagram because Facebook owns Instagram now. With access to the information, how much it actually stores on the phone and how easily cops can get access to that.
So somebody made a protest camera app, and it's not really an app. It's a command line thing. And God, I'm going to go look for it and hope that I can find it so that we can link it. But basically, if you put your pictures on your computer and you go through, it scans looking for faces and then it blurs out all the faces and identifiable marks and stuff. And I thought it was just a really, really cool thing.
That's awesome.
I'm going to try to find the link so that we can share it because I thought it was a really cool project and a really cool thing that somebody did. Because, you know, like John Boyega from Star Wars.
Yes.
Gave a rousing speech in like London today at the protest. And he basically said during his speech, he was really worried that if he was going to have a job to go back to or if he was going to get hired, because typically being known and protesting and this kind of stuff will negatively affect you.
And I love his response after he said that. Fuck it.
right? But yes, like your phones can be used against you. And there's another really interesting way that they can, and that's through what's called Geofence Warrants, which get used quite a bit. They're reverse location searches. So basically, police say, I have a problem in this location specifically. I need everybody's phone who is in this location. And they'll hit up somebody like Google. Google gets a whole bunch of these requests because of location history, right? So they could potentially get like thousands of people's information looking for one criminal. And like, you can't see me do the air quote thing right now, but I'm totally doing it.
Yeah.
And like pulling that information on this reverse location warrant in a protest for like thousands and thousands of people. So like very, very interesting. And like really think about like what's turned on your phone if you're going to go out and protest. Because like that's really important because you could get wrapped up in a lot of this stuff. And I am 100% in support of so I am 100% in support of people going out and protesting, but it is important to like keep track of like what's tracking you while you're doing it and what the long-term effects might be. Like Exile was talking with photos and identifying information and things like that, as well as this geo tracking and stuff. And it says records obtained from the EFF found that University of California police issued a warrant to phone providers to identify photo numbers and names of demonstrators that were at the 2017 protests at the University of California, Berkeley. So like you could literally be doing nothing wrong and get swept up into this whole thing because, again, air quotes, criminal.
Yeah, and some of the other crazy stuff too is like on a mobile phone, deleted data is not considered protected data behind a search warrant and probable cause in order to search. So let's say you're at a protest, you get arrested, your phone is not encrypted, and they can scrape all the deleted information off of your phone, included deleted messages, deleted pictures, and stuff like that, and get free access to that without going through a court system to get a warrant to search for that.
Mm-hmm.
Fun stuff.
This one is a very unique point in time because we have a whole new way to track people. And I'm pretty sure we called this out, right?
I know I called this out with my real life friends.
Yeah, I don't know if we've called this out before, but if we haven't talked about it, let's talk about contact tracing. Contact tracing is something that's been developed by major tech companies for coronavirus primarily, right? As a way to basically track people and who they've been in contact with, and then whether or not they might have been exposed to corona. Anything you want to add on that one?
One, every time I hear the term, it makes my skin crawl. Not because I'm not concerned about people's health and safety. I'm very much concerned about people's health and safety. But because historically, let's look at how advertising information has been used up to this point. Collected forever.
Definitely talked about that before.
Yes. And so, I mean, how often do we hear if you don't learn from history, it's doomed to repeat itself? So if a past behavior of collecting quote unquote anonymous data has been successful for governmental use, what happens when they start putting names and numbers and actual relevant information to that? And even though it quote unquote exists only for health purposes.
Well, I can tell you exactly what happens.
Yes, what we're ready to talk about.
This is something that got made literally within the last couple months or weeks specifically to solve a certain problem. And their privacy experts have a lot of concerns about that.
And this is independent of what anyone thinks about the COVID-19 situation itself.
Correct. Completely independent, because guess what happened? Minnesota officials have said publicly that they're using contact tracing to better understand who the protesters are and where they're coming from.
And this was before Trump signed in the order to give the DEA access to track down protest leaders through any means necessary.
Correct. This article is from May 30th that this is. So like this started, I mean, like a week ago, but still like it's a thing. So like we're seeing this technology that was, again, developed for the best of intentions being used to track people who are out, largely most of them out there supporting and standing up for their own fucking rights. It's this kind of stuff is always frightening to people like me in Exiled, I think, and this is the kind of reason that it's frightening, because it gets used like this.
Mm-hmm.
It gets used where the tool is being used to track protesters, and like that's not fucking okay.
Because now they become targeted by what we've seen are very not all police departments, but there are departments that have proven video time over and over again in the past week of targeting and being overly aggressive to people.
Correct. So like now you're adding a whole bunch of other stuff to it. So like again, another reason, like be careful with your technology, because like at this point, like it could very much be used against you. I think on that note, because I think that mostly like you have one more actually that's really just to end on a lighter note. Like this is not a light week. This is not a light topic. This is not a light anything. But we want to end on a little bit of a lighter note. But I do want to say one more time that Black Lives Matter a lot, and like my heart really goes out to everybody who's out in the streets right now. And I'm really, really hoping that we get sustainable long-term change this time.
So before I go on to the last thing here, which I love, it makes me love the internet culture we live in, while disliking some of the things. At the protest last night, there were some of the organizers that had a group go around to a different section of the fence that had no one at it before. And the first group that was there, there was a black man who was standing at the fence who was angry, and he was yelling about the things that he's dealt with specifically with that police department. I didn't take any pictures of that because in that moment, this was everyone needs to be looking at this man because this is the example of why we're here.
Yeah, there's one of the most shocking ones to me was honestly one of the least brutal, but it was a kid in North Carolina who was kneeling and he was screaming, "None of you are my enemy. I don't dislike any of you. I respect all of you." And he was talking to cops too, and he said, I want to see you all on your best day. This is not our best day. I want to understand you. And he just kept over and over again saying, I want to understand you. I want you to understand me. And like 4 cops walked up, dragged him away, arrested him, and he spent a night in prison. And he did nothing.
Yeah.
And that's not to count all the people who have been maced for doing nothing or trapped in alleyways and smoke bombed and pellet bombed and all this other stuff. But like, it's so disheartening to watch these people who like, they're not even screaming at the cops, like in a violent way.
And that video clip wasn't even like a 20-second clip that you could take out of context. It was 4-6 minutes of.
It was 2 or 3 minutes, but you could not take it out of context.
Yeah.
Or New York City officers covering their badge and saying it's because of COVID, but covering their badge numbers. Like it's bad and just, it's bad.
So back to the thing that makes us love the internet culture is, and also why people love K-pop.
I don't love K-pop, but continue.
Well, that's because you haven't listened to it enough.
They're growing on me because of this.
So it was fantastic. So K-pop stans decided to flood social media, and this actually extended to protest snitch lines too, with K-pop pictures and GIFs. So like for an example, they went on Instagram, and if it was what was it? It was Blue
Lives Matter or MAGA.
Yeah, any of that stuff. Blue Lives Matter, MAGA. Where's the list? I just had it in front of me. But what that would do, instead of come up with normal stuff, it was pictures of various K-pop artists or K-pop artists dancing or things like that. And our K-pop stans people made us proud today by showing us how technology can be used to stop any sort of oppressive aspects in social media.
Basically flooding all the right-wing hashtags with K-pop artists, which is just hilarious.
And like I said, they did it to, I can't remember what cities, I'll have to find it again, but they did it to some cities that set up protester snitch lines. They did it over because they had an internet presence to it, and they did
the Dallas police app.
Yeah. They did it to that and caused them to shut down the app because it was flooded so much with this. It made me smile and laugh and warm my heart to see our K-pop family helping us out that way.
Yeah. At least that ends on a somewhat light note, but let's and this is going to be really weird for a podcast, but let's just take like a moment of silence for everything that's going on in the world and in some semblance of solidarity, shall we? Okay, moments of silence are very weird on podcasts, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, it just reminds me. Last thing I want to say is one of the things the Portland protests have been starting to get in the news for is I have to check about today, but at least last night and the 2 nights prior, 10,000 plus people would take over one of the bridges, and they would either lay on their bellies with their hands behind their back or kneel for 9 minutes. No one said a thing.
We will not do 9 minutes of silence. That would be really awkward on a podcast.
And it's really brutal. Like, just try to do it by yourself. You'll be lucky to make it to a minute.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. So let's go into other news and some unrelated news. And you have more of this than me, so like you kick us off with a couple.
All right, let me get back to the document here instead of looking at your face. So let's start off with a fun one here about an Austrian city that managed to get taken over by some ransomware. It's
always ransomware.
It's always ransomware. Sophos, nope. Oh, well. Well, I lost my moment on that. Oh, yeah, here it is. I got it. So we talked about this. COVID-19 as the bait. This was started off with COVID-19 as bait on phishing email. And it did...
Color me surprised there.
Right? Hit a city government in Austria, and it was using VB scripts to do its automated spread across the network.
Color me surprised there.
How many times have we talked about this?
I mean, it's always phishing lore, VB script, PowerShell infection. I mean, it's predictable.
Yep.
But still so hard to stop.
And continues to be effective, which is why they're not changing tactics.
Yeah, I mean, if it works, right? Why
Yeah.
not do it?
Especially when it's not affecting your profit model. And this stuff is all about the profit.
Oh, God, yeah. All profit. What else you got?
Let's see. Let's move on to ProLock. Back to the U.S. with the FBI. So the FBI recently released some information about ProLock. One, this is ransomware again, but one, the decryptor doesn't always work even after you pay the ransom. And two, it spreads through Quackbot, which is a name that has been around for a while on getting that initial infection.
So that's actually interesting to me because one of the core tenets of ransomware has always been that if any ransomware is going to have any validity and they're actually going to make money, the decryptor must work.
Yep.
Like that has kind of always been one of those things. Like I would almost have to chalk this up probably to like bad coding because like I don't know that I've ever seen a piece of ransomware that broke that contract. And I get that like people are like, well, it's criminals. Who cares? Well, it's criminals who want to get paid. And the moment they start breaking that contract,
profit model,
the moment they start breaking that contract is the moment that they stop getting paid. Because if it was normal for ransomware to not decrypt, you would never ever get paid. So like, it's really weird to ever hear about ransomware that doesn't pay somebody. To me, anyway. You got a lot of like interesting ransomware ones, don't you?
Yeah. It was weird because I've been collecting them because we recorded a special guest last, had the week off for the holidays. So some of these are from a few weeks ago, but apparently there was a rash of ransomware news that I came across. This next one is because we did have, when COVID-19 came out, We did see a huge back off of people hitting hospitals with ransomware. It was kind of a, hey, we were doing this, but now that it's a global epidemic that actually affects us, we're going to back off on it. Well, it's going again. And this time it's Lockheed hitting hospitals.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So I actually have another malware-ish kind of ransomware one too. TrickBot, right? Just got a major update. And you referenced TrickBot a minute ago. Major update in April. So, TrickBot being kind of a modular piece of malware changes stuff all the time. Last September, they started using MMWorm, which helped it spread since September, but it's been replaced with a new module, NWorm. Now, if it infects a domain controller or anything, the malware is run entirely from memory, ensuring that no artifacts are left behind on the infected machine. So, like, TrickBot just got incredibly more difficult to detect. And the binary used by NWorm is encrypted when transferred over the internet, which basically hides it from being flagged as malicious because it doesn't show up as malicious, right? Complete change, and a lot of these series of changes continues to evolve. This was a Palo Alto Networks Unit 42 research piece. But I expect that we'll see a lot more of that, or consequently, we won't because people won't find it. One of the also a possibility. Anyway, what else?
So I'll do one more ransomware, and then I've got actually, I guess the next two are ransomware. I only had ransomware today. So I found one here where it was this one called Pony Final. That was, instead of going down the whole PowerShell VB script, it decided to use Java for getting itself going. And Microsoft is calling this a human-operated ransomware.
Interesting. And you talked about the one that spins up a VM, right? To make it harder to detect?
That's the last one.
Yeah, that's the last one. Did we talk about the actual VM thing and like the VirtualBox side of it that was really interesting?
We haven't got to it yet, so we'll jump into that. So that one is, I want to save this one for last because I love the name of it. It's the Ragnar Locker ransomware because, the Vikings TV show was a huge thing right now. It's fantastic. So, at least they're giving a shout out to Ragnar. But yeah, so this uses, it sets up a virtual machine in a host that it owns. So there's no real escape, right? They don't necessarily have to escape outside of the virtual machine. And what were you going to say about it?
I think it's really interesting because it's basically hitting a box and then spinning up a virtual box, which is basically making EDR technology moot on it, right? Like, this is a tactic to make sure that it cannot be detected through EDR technology. And it's a relatively new tactic, like one that I haven't seen before. So I think it's just a really, really interesting tactic to talk about. Because now you're going to have to start looking for like virtual box and like things spinning up virtual box. Maybe we can talk more about that probably in the detection section.
Yeah, because you're going to have, in this situation, you're going to have to stop depending on your various endpoint detections that won't catch it and start looking.
Or even your Windows logs. Like, you're not going to get logs.
Because the window logs itself are coming from the host operating system and not from the virtual machine that it spun up.
Exactly.
So you have to go back to OG stuff and do it network-based.
Later. Save it. We'll talk about it later. This is a good one to talk about later.
Sorry. I got caught up in the moment.
Anyway. What else you got? Anything?
That was the last one. I do have a couple things.
Hold on, I'll do one of the other news. I have one to end on, but I have another one that we can talk about really quick.
Yeah.
There's a list of well-known websites that port scan their visitors. And I thought this was really interesting to talk about, that many well-known and heavily used websites are using a fraud protection script specifically that port scans your local computer for remote access programs. So eBay being one of them. And then there's a whole list of different sites like Citibank and TD and Chick-fil-A, apparently. looking for like access from like VNC or like remote desktop RDP and TeamViewer and stuff like that. But they're using this really big script, an anti-fraud script that port scans your box, and like, you know, you figure out how you really feel about that, right? But that's kind of interesting, that a bunch of these sites are port scanning your box when you visit the website. It's like Netflix, Target, Walmart, ESPN, Lloyd Bank, like Ticketmaster, TripAdvisor, maybe even Microsoft. Like there's a lot of major sites doing it. We'll post a link. You can read all about it, and you can see all the different things that were shared and all the different sites that do it. Go ahead, go into your other stuff.
Yeah, so the last thing I have is completely unrelated, but I just wanted to bring it up because it was an awesome thing. So there's this rap duo that goes by the name Run the Jewels that was going to release their new album, I think this Friday. They recorded it in last fall, but they decided to release it early yesterday for free in light of all current situations. So it was them saying, hey, we get what's going on, and our way of supporting that is have our music for free early. And
isn't basically all music free now, though, because of Apple Music and stuff?
Well, so you either pay for it in advertising or pay through it in subscription. So they're still getting some money.
Sure.
But what I was going to say is one of the two is Killer Mike, and he did a fantastic talk in Atlanta. The first night Atlanta was having really bad rioting.
So, are you ready for a spooky story?
Let me turn off the lights and get my flashlight.
Okay. I'm going to hold my flashlight up to my face. The lights are already off. Nobody at home can see this, so they can't verify whether or not I'm lying. So let's talk about a spooky story about the tale of the cursed wallpaper. This one's just so fun to me. So there's a wallpaper running around for Android devices, and it's a gorgeous photo. It's a really gorgeous photo, a picture of a sunset. However, when you set it as your wallpaper, it can brick your Android phone, which is just amusing. Like, I thought we left that a long time ago, right? What it is the image has an improperly coded Google Color profile, which causes the Android system UI to crash from an out of bounds error. So for some phones, you can reboot into safe mode and reset the wallpaper. But for others, you basically have to go into the bootloader and completely factory reset your phone. Basically proving that 2020 is the weirdest or darkest timeline.
Make sure everyone gets their goatees.
Yeah, there's totally a cursed wallpaper. And people are posting it all over going, warning, never set this picture as your wallpaper, especially for Samsung. It will cause your phone to crash. And guess what? Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
No, and then their phones are crashing.
No, we don't believe you. We got to try it for ourselves.
I can't pretend that I probably wouldn't want to try it for myself too, though. That's the thing. Like, I am the clicker of links. I would probably want to click it too.
Part of it also kind of reminds me of back in the day when people were trying to learn about 3D rendering themselves in their GPUs. And then they would just like pull up the test videos that would slowly ramp up the resolution. It would be like a nuclear bomb or something going off, and it was just a test to see how long it took before you crashed your GPU.
Oh, yeah. And just another really interesting thing that I got in a couple patches. And I'm going to talk about one set because they're actually like made by a hacker dude named Hacker Patches on Etsy, and we'll link them because one of the reasons why I really like it, it's the QR code for the iCar test file. So like it's nice. A patch that's the QR, it's the iCar QR Velcro patch.
Nice.
And he's charging like $3.86 for this patch. And he's got two patches. He's got that one and he's got an F Society one. But like the iCar one is just so freaking cool. And we're gonna link it because I got it in and I think it's really cool. I also got some really cool COVID patches, but I can't remember where I got them from. But it's basically like Operation Enduring Clusterfuck, which made me laugh really hard.
Hashtag 2020.
And there was another one that was like Purell Storm 2020. And it's the dog in the firing building wearing a mask with a bottle of Purell and a bunch of toilet paper stacks next to him. and like, this is fine. And I'm like, these are good patches. I think those were from Reaper patches. And I'll try to link those too for any of you swag lovers out there. Yeah, it's Reaper patches. So like we'll link those too for the swag lovers who love the patch stuff. It will look really nice on your bag next to a detections patch if you have one.
Yes.
So,
Which
so
those are only available through special circumstances.
Pretty much. So does that take us into our topic?
Yeah, there is no transition to our topic from where we were before.
No, there's really not. And like, here's the thing. We knew that this was going to be a really heavy news topic. So we kind of picked probably, I mean, it's not really a lighter topic, but like forcing it to be a lighter topic keeps either of us from getting too far off the rails on the negative side of this topic, right? And that topic is the question, is an MSSP right for you? And this becomes a really, really interesting topic in a lot of ways. And a conversation I've had with a lot of people having, run operation centers and MSSPs and worked for several MSSPs and exiled, same for you. So, not speaking specifically about any place that either of us have been at any point in time, but like really what's interesting is if you're in an organization, like working for a company, or even if you're an analyst looking for a job, like is an MSSP right for you? And it would probably help to say what an MSSP is.
So that stands for Managed Security Service Provider. Sometimes that same kind of work, like you pay them to do SOC work or incident response, is wrapped up in an MSP, a Managed Service Provider, which also does networking, network-related, network operations center-related functionality. Some of the more current terms for it are SOC as a service or managed detection and response, MDR.
MDR.
Yeah.
BSOC is another one that gets tossed around depending on level of service.
Yeah.
There's a couple different ones. And I think we want to answer, or we want to not necessarily answer, but give you questions to ask. One, do you want to work in one? And two, is it right for your company to basically, and we're going to talk probably specifically from the concept of like outsourcing your security operations center, right? Like that's our background. So like, which question do you want to tackle first? Is it right for your company or do you want to work there?
I'm going to go with something on, do you want to work there first? And a good question and something to think about when you're doing it is, how many different security technologies and tools does it use, and will you get exposed to?
Correct. So, and that's something really heavy in the pro side, right? Because when you're there, so there's two things that you get that are pretty unique. If you're with like a pure play provider, you get access to potentially every enterprise grade tool from EDR and SIM and all these different things, and you can use them. If you're not with a pure play, like if you're with a vendor, right, like a CrowdStrike or any of those other vendors, you get access to their tool, but you also get access to potentially hundreds of clients.
Yep.
So you have access to hundreds of different networks, and you can look at things differently, and like you're going to see things differently because of those different networks. So like from a building your baseline and learning, it can be a really, really wonderful opportunity. However,
but at the same time, what that could also mean is there is a high potential for no opportunity to dig in to individual events to find out what's going on and learn beyond the basics that they have. It could also mean that there isn't enough visibility for you to fully look into a full investigation. And then it could just be like one tool on one customer that you may never touch or only touch like once a month. Or even other things like you'll fall into that whole underpaid overwork trap.
Absolutely. And those are really important things to talk about too, because, and let's hit them. So like the first one is you might get buried in a mountain of alerts because you might have 10 to 40 people who are handling alerts for 200 customers, right? And because of the way these are set up, and we can get to that when we talk about is one good for your business, they're going to be similar alerts across because there has to be some similarity. But visibility and investigation can become a real problem because you might have the alert, you might have some logs, you might have some stuff, but one, you might lack time. And that's a very real problem. Like you might really lack time. The other thing that you might really lack is this concept of like having the visibility or the impact. So like you can find something, but like what happens when you find it? You send it off to their security team and they fix it. So there's no like interacting with end users, there's no changing security policy, there's no any of that stuff that you can really do to make them more secure. What you can do is say, this is what I found, this is the information that I have the visibility for, here you go.
And and sometimes you can say, here's our suggestion on what to do with it.
Exactly. So you basically become nothing more than a triage analyst in a lot of cases. And this probably isn't true for every MSSP, but for a good majority of them, or the ones that I've had experience in, you are a triage analyst. Like that is the max of that job. Like you are not doing much more past triage because you're not going out and getting logs from a bunch of different places, and you're not looking at other sources, or you're not pulling down forensics or any of that. Like you're just sending it over to them and going, hey, this is what I found. Here you go. It'd be really cool if you could tell me what happened on the other end. So like upside, you get access to all of this different technology and all of these different client sites and see all of this different stuff, which can be so good for like moving your career forward. Downside, you're really only going to like, in my world, like step 3 of the investigation process. And then you're stopping right there and you're done at step 3 of the investigation process.
And then there are some that may get you the logs, lets you have the ability to dig in more. But my experience has been often they don't necessarily have the tooling or their policies and procedures in place to let you work with that efficiently. So you have to pull this information from many, many different sources and possibly have to remote into 2 or 3 different, have like 3 different remote sessions running at the same time. You have to correlate everything manually in your note-taking program.
And if those logs don't exist, you can't make them exist. Like you can make a suggestion, but you can't actually change anything. So like those are things to think about. Like they end up being, in my opinion, very, very good entry-level jobs. Very good places to kind of go and get a start in the industry, right? Because they're very prevalent. You get access to a lot of different technology and a lot of different networks, but you never move past that kind of initial level of detection. But they tend to also function a lot because of that as revolving doors. So analysts leave pretty regularly because you really never get past that like step 3 of an investigation process or that triage. So those are all things to consider from the like working for an MSSP side. And you can go into other areas of the MSSP. They might have an IR branch, they might have a detection branch and stuff, and all those exist. So I'm not discounting working there, but I don't know anybody who wants to stay there for long periods of time. They end up being a little bit more of a mill, kind of a through mill for people to gain experience and then move on.
Yeah, of most of the ones that I've interacted with, they generally are okay with the whole puppy mill syndrome of bringing in new people, training them up, and letting them move on. There are some exceptions to that that become very notable very quickly, and I bet most of our listeners probably know who they are already.
Yep. There's a lot of people trying to redefine that problem as well.
Yes.
And so it would probably be useful right now to talk about like, you know, as a business, like if you're a business and you're thinking about this, and then we can kind of dig down into it more. So like if you're a business who's thinking about an MSSP, you have a need for it, right? Be that you want 24-hour coverage. It could be for compliance. It could be for a whole bunch of reasons. But it's often cheaper to outsource logic like this. And it's cheaper to do things like that. And it's cheaper to get a team of 30 or 40 people. But the one thing that you have to remember is those 30 or 40 people aren't yours. Those 30 or 40 people belong to 200 other customers who vary in size and all that kind of stuff. One of the other things that's really important to remember is that these services work by being non-customizable. So like these services work because they say, here is our standard rule set. We're going to send out our standard rule set. We're going to tell you when we think something matters. You're not necessarily going to get a lot of say in what it is that you want looked for, unless that's specifically in your contract. And if it is specifically in your contract, which it should be, you'll probably be hated by the majority of the people who work at that MSSP because you're screwing up all their processes by being a snowflake. But the truth is, in my opinion, every security company has their own challenges and things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and on the other side of that, though, is those usually are the ones that have that broken that 100 customer mark. There are smaller service
Correct.
providers out there that stay under the 100 customer mark that can handle the customizations per client a little bit better because they don't have so many working, and they usually have very level contracts. So those, if they need like high touch, lots of time customized, those are usually less than 10 customers out of their entire base. And a lot of the others are simpler things, so they have a little bit more flexibility with their shift time on how to do that.
Correct. But even some of those can get really difficult because honestly, I don't think it's 100 customers. I think once you start getting above 10 customers on highly customized service, things start to get really difficult. Unless you're hiring for it. And if you're hiring for it, you're charging a lot more than what competitors are going to charge.
Yeah, and then on the hiring side, usually what ends up happening is you're looking for the unicorn that's willing to take low pay.
Pretty much. And unicorns who are willing to take low pay don't really come around. So you end up getting people out of college who get experience, but then they get that experience and they go. So like I genuinely encourage people to very thoroughly interview MSSPs if they're thinking about going with an MSSP. Ask them hard questions. Understand what their analysts know. Talk to the analysts and the people who run the detection programs, not the salespeople.
And even ask them, like their analysts, what's the average time frame that the analyst has worked for a company?
Yeah.
That is a decent indication of internal culture, which will show analyst satisfaction. The more satisfied analysts stick around longer, and they're usually more interested and maintain a higher passion throughout that time frame because they're allowed to do engaging work.
So what you get is you get coverage and you get triage, essentially. So you get this concept of coverage and triage. So somebody is there looking at stuff. They're there all night. They're going to have SLAs. Most of those SLAs, if they miss them, like they're in trouble, right? Like the customer's in trouble. They're taking a financial penalty, something like that. So you're going to get people who are looking at your stuff in a timely fashion. What you're often going to lose is customization. You're going to lose an understanding of your network. Like these people aren't going to understand your network. They're not going to be able to. They've got too many other customers as well. So you lose some of that understanding. So like they could look at something that's really, really bad and be like, yeah, that looks okay.
Yeah.
Like
I have a story of that of an analyst that we brought in, and I was training while I was still working as an analyst. This guy had no background. He was getting trained up, which was fine, but he wouldn't ask questions. And he ended up closing a ticket with the notes of unable to read the payload, false positive. I took a look at it. It was just simply a base 64 encoded payload that was actual propagation of malware.
And I mean, that kind of stuff isn't all that surprising.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about too on the business side that is incredibly important that I've seen hurt many contracts is something we've talked about many times in many different areas, and that's scoping. Understanding your scoping when you go into it. Take the time up front to figure out what your actual business need is for your service provider. Because that will actually help you on the business side have a satisfactory and pleasant experience with the service provider by telling them exactly what you want.
Yeah, remember, if you want this to be successful, it's a partnership. You have to be willing to work together. Like, you know, when you hire in a consultant or bring in consultants, it's a partnership. Like they're doing the things that you need them to do. But the general rule of thumb, especially for long-time monthly contracts or yearly contracts like this, is don't just listen to what somebody tells you is going to happen. Make sure it's in the contract before you sign it. But make sure that you also understand realistically what you're getting and what you need, because that will help you make that decision. Like there is a lot of need in the world for managed service providers and managed SOCs. They have trade-offs. Like there's no way around that, right? Trade-offs exist. You lose some things when you go that route. You gain some things when you go that route. So we're not here to say whether or not they're evil or they're good. We are here to say, if you're going to work at one, or if you're, you know, looking at buying one, do your homework. Like, and make sure like the contract makes sense, because both of those things are very important, and will lead to a much better relationship and partnership between two companies.
Yeah, and maintaining that partnership is the thing that I've seen make contracts succeed or fail. And I've driven people to never talk to each other again because there was the contract itself was very vague, each side took a different interpretation to it. So they both thought that something wasn't being done or was done that fell within the bounds of the contract. Or it was so vague that scope creep happened on one side or the other, which made it become very unprofitable and then run at a major loss to the service provider.
Yep. And that happens quite a bit too. So, like I said, we wanted, and I think that probably sums it up for the most part. We wanted to pick not necessarily a light topic because it is an important topic that we could probably dig into a lot longer. But I think we covered probably the main points that we want to cover with a very, very news-filled week. We can move into the detection in a minute. I do want to say, like, next week I think is going to be really interesting. We talked about a lot of privacy stuff, and we talked about a lot of, digital safety and privacy and everything.
And the changing state of surveillance in the U.S.
Correct. So would you like to kind of tee up the guest for next week?
Yes.
And then we have to really hope that nothing goes wrong because we said it on the air.
Yes. So I saw that there was a surveillance technology, anti-surveillance technology journalist that had recently lost their job and was looking for work. And a number of people that both Understudy and I follow and respect for various reasons in the cybersecurity community gave this person serious backing. So he reached out, and my thought was, this is very relevant to what we're facing in current events, and let's see if she'd be willing to come on. So she said yes. We're going to get her in here next week, and we're going to have a discussion about surveillance and anti-surveillance technology, what she's seen as a journalist, and what that could mean for us as American citizens.
It's going to be awesome. I'm really excited about that one. So let's move on to the detection.
What do you got for us?
So I think we're going to, and I know we shouldn't, but I think we're going to do two. I think we're going to do two because I have a statement to make on the virtual machine one, but I don't know if it's right because I haven't played with this malware. So I don't want to just do that one and then be wrong. So my thought for the malware that's launching VirtualBox, and it's basically using VirtualBoxes like shared folders and stuff so that it can propagate through the network itself. One interesting thing that you could look for stuff like that, and this, I'm making an assumption here. And I want to make it very clear that I'm making an assumption here. Something has to kick off that virtual machine, and I'm assuming it's not going to be user interaction. I'm assuming that some other file of some sort has to kick off the VM. So you could basically normalize virtual machines processes, like the parent process for virtual machine in your network, and then look for things that exist outside of that normalization. Like if a user kicks it off, I want to say it would be like Explorer. I don't work with Windows every day anymore. And then you could kind of normalize that concept and say, well, what kicked it off? And then look for that. But again, I'm making a big ass assumption here because I don't know exactly how this shit works because I haven't tested it.
Just as a specific example of what you're talking about, if the Qbot hasn't done any of the normal stuff like disabling logging and turning off security software, running it like we've talked about with the anomaly detection, setting the baseline, and just see, is VirtualBox running on that machine normal for that machine?
Correct. And then what processes are starting virtual machine? And then you can start to say, okay, like maybe it's, 12345.exe or something that's starting that VM, or whatever it is that's doing it, or a scheduled task that's starting it or something. So you should see like potentially task scheduler starting it. So like that's one thing. But because I'm not sure, another one, since this was so malware heavy, it's really worth talking about, and we've probably mentioned it at some point before because we're not smart and we never wrote down all of our past detections. It's the concept of malware staging locations. So like there's 3 locations that malware tends to land a lot, and the initial file will drop, and like that's where stuff works. And that's temp, TMP, app data, and program data. And I think we talked about this a little bit with Matt last week.
Yeah, and the app data and program data are in the user profile.
Correct.
So you look for the individual user profile for those rather than like public.
One of the reasons that app data and program data are so relevant is because they're what's basically enhanced user privilege folders. So like if you don't want to give the user the ability to run things as admin, you can run things from app data and program data, which give them some additional privileges. which is a really, really interesting way to kind of run stuff. So like looking for things running from temp app data or program data is pretty uncommon. You can baseline it pretty easily, and you can find some really, really cool shit doing that. So like that's my concept for detection that I know will work, because I don't know if the VM one will work. I'm just, again, I'm making an assumption.
Theoretically, without having done the work to prove it, it sounds viable for the virtual machine stuff.
I guess on that note, man, take us out.
Well, thank you for joining us. Even though this was a bit heavy, we are in heavy times, but we're still bringing you relevant information. Want to say one more time, Black Lives Matter.
Black lives absolutely matter.
Okay, matter. So, everyone, be healthy, be safe, go forth, and find badness.